She texts the Italian Mafia boss by mistake. Minutes later, black cars surround her house. What happens when a single text message, sent out of desperation, awakens a ghost? Elena Ricci, a dedicated nurse, is about to find out. To save her brother, she sends a plea for help to an old number. A shot in the dark she regrets the instant she hits send. But her message doesn't reach a forgotten friend. It arrives on the encrypted cell phone of Don Marcello Moretti, the city's most ruthless mafia boss, a man for whom Elena's words are a threat that must be silenced. This is the story of a mistake that turns into destiny, and of an ordinary woman dragged into a world where power is absolute and protection comes at a very high price. Get ready, because the story begins now. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any breathtaking stories. The smell of antiseptic and old age was the first thing that greeted her at the start of every shift, and the last she took with her home. Elena Ricci no longer noticed it. It was simply the air she breathed. She moved with a silent efficiency through the dimly lit room, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. Exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a lead cloak, a constant companion that deepened the shadows beneath her eyes. Her patient, Mr. Rossi, was a map of a 90-year life. His skin, thin as tissue paper, stretched over bones that seemed as fragile as a bird's. His breath was a frail whisper, a tenuous thread connecting him to this world. As a palliative care nurse, Elena's job was to ensure this passage was smooth, dignified. She moistened his lips with a gauze, a small act of compassion amidst the inevitable. Most of the time, he slept, navigating seas of memories only he knew. But today, something had changed. His eyes, previously cloudy and distant, suddenly opened, locking onto hers with a shocking clarity. His skeletal hand shot out, grabbing Elena's wrist with a strength that belied his fragile state. Elena started, not at the gesture, but at the burning urgency in his gaze. "Mr. Rossi," she whispered, her voice calm, trained to soothe. He pulled her closer, his breath smelling sweetly of the end. His lips barely moved. "Tell him," he hissed, his voice a rustle of dry leaves. The book, the Cypress Hills book. It was Leo Malatesta. The words floated in the silence of the room, devoid of context, heavy with a meaning she couldn't decipher. Cypress Hills, Leo Malatesta. They sounded like names out of an old black and white film. She placed her free hand over his, a gesture to calm him. "It's all right, Mr. Rossi. Rest now." He ignored her, his eyes burning into hers. "You have to tell him." His strength abandoned him as quickly as it had come. His hand loosened, and his head fell back onto the pillow. The storm in his eyes passed, leaving behind the empty calm from before. Elena straightened up, her heart beating a little faster than normal. Delirium. It was common. Minds adrift, clinging to the wreckage of a lifetime. She noted the episode in his chart, but his words stuck in her mind, strange and out of place. Hours later, the smell of antiseptic was replaced by the smell of dust and the loneliness of her small apartment. The controlled calm of her job unraveled the moment she closed the door. Here, there was no dignity, only the quiet chaos of unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen table and the hum of the old refrigerator. The linoleum of her own floor felt colder, less forgiving. That's when the phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the silence. It was a blocked number. She felt her stomach sink, a stone of ice dropping into an empty well. She answered, her hand already trembling. "Elena." The voice on the other end was oily and sharp like broken glass. "Your little brother has a talent for making promises he can't keep." She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool wall. "I'll get the money. I just need a little more time." A low, cruel laugh echoed down the line. "Time is the one thing you two don't have. The deadline was today. Every hour you're late, the price goes up. And so does the pain." In the background, she could hear a groan. Matteo's strained voice. Her brother. Her stupid, reckless, beloved brother. Don't hurt him! Her voice came out louder than she intended, a mix of pleading and fury. Please. Midnight. Or I'll break his fingers one by one and send them to you in a little box. Maybe then he'll learn not to gamble with what he can't afford. The line went dead. Panic was a flood, rising in her throat, drowning her. She slid down the wall to the floor, the phone falling from her numb hand. Thousands of dollars. An impossible sum. She had nothing. No savings, no assets, nowhere to run. And then, like a feverish echo, Mr. Rossi's words returned. Leo Malatesta. Madness. The delirium of a dying man. But what else was left? Clinging to that shred of hope, she scrambled to the small desk where she kept the few things belonging to Mr. Rossi. Inside a drawer was an old leather address book, its edges worn with time. With trembling fingers, she flipped through the yellowed pages to the letter M. And there it was. Malatesta, Leo. Beside it, a phone number, the ink faded but still legible. Her brain screamed that it was useless. A number from decades ago, likely disconnected. And even if it wasn't, what would she say? But the image of Mateo's broken fingers, the oily voice of the loan shark. Desperation was a tyrant, and it demanded action. She picked up her cell phone, her fingers slick with sweat. She couldn't call. What would she say? Instead, she opened a new text message, the blank white screen mocking her foolishness. She typed, deleted. Typed again, trying to find the right words to sound sane, to not be immediately dismissed. I'm with Mr. Rossi. He is not well. He told me about a book from Cypress Hills and a man named Leo Malatesta. My brother needs help. Please, if you can help, call me. Her thumb hovered over the send button. An abyss opened up beneath her. This was all she had. A whispered name and an ancient number. She closed her eyes and pressed. Sent. The regret was instant and overwhelming. What a fool. She felt like a child wishing on a falling star. The silence in her apartment seemed to deepen, now heavy with the weight of her ridiculous hope. She waited a minute. 2. Nothing. The ice in her stomach began to solidify. Then, the phone vibrated in her hand, the violent buzz in her palm making her jump. A response. It wasn't a call. It was a message. There were no words of comfort. No questions. Just 3 dots, indicating that someone was typing. They hovered on the screen for an eternity, then disappeared, and were replaced by a single word. Where? A chill ran down her spine. The word wasn't a request for information. It was a command. Cold. Absolute. Before she could even think of how to reply, a low sound began to permeate the thin walls of her building. A low, guttural rumble, growing in volume. She stood up, drawn to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Down below, on her quiet suburban street, the darkness of the night was cut by 3 pairs of headlights. 3 black SUVs, enormous and identical, glided to the curb with a silent military precision. The lights went out, but the engines continued to purr, the sound a promise of restrained power. They formed a perimeter around her building, predators of metal and dark glass waiting in the dark. The air in her lungs froze. This wasn't help. This was something else. Something terrible. She looked down at the phone in her trembling hand, the screen still glowing with that single word. Where? And she realized with a breath-stealing clarity that she hadn't just made a mistake. She had lit a fuse, and the bomb had just arrived at her door. The sound of her own blood pulsing in her ears was louder than the purr of the engines below. Elena backed away from the window, an instinctive step away from the threat, as if moving away from the glass could make her invisible. Her apartment, once a small, safe sanctuary, suddenly felt like a glass trap, fragile and exposed. The thin walls offered no protection. They seemed to breathe with the vibration of the vehicles outside. Her brain struggled to connect the dots. The message, the reply, the cars. It didn't make sense. It was a disproportionate reaction, a seismic response to a whisper. logic unraveled, replaced by a primal, icy fear that spread through her veins. Who were these people? What did Leo Malatesta, a name from a dusty past, mean to them? The phone in her hand vibrated again, the buzz making her jump. It was a call, the same number as the message. For a moment, she just stared at it, paralyzed. Declining the call felt like an act of self-preservation, a small rebellion. But the fear of what would happen if she didn't answer was greater. With a trembling finger, she slid to answer, bringing the device to her ear without a word. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, charged. It wasn't the silence of a bad connection, but the silence of a calculated presence. She could feel someone there, listening to her shallow, frightened breaths. "Open the door, Elena." The voice was low, a calm baritone with a gravelly edge. It wasn't loud, not threatening in tone, but the command was absolute. There was a resonance of power in that voice, a certainty that it would be obeyed. The way he said her name, not as a question, but as a fact, made the hair on her neck stand on end. He wasn't asking who she was. He already knew. Who are you?" Her own voice was a wisp, barely audible. "The person you contacted for help." There was a cold irony in his words, so subtle she almost missed it. "I'm at your door. You have 10 seconds to open it before I open it myself. I would prefer the first option. It's less destructive." She heard the soft click of the line going dead. In that exact moment, a knock sounded at her door. It wasn't a loud or aggressive knock. It was a firm, patient, almost courteous knock. And that, somehow, was even more terrifying. It was the knock of someone who didn't need to force their way in, because they knew the door would open. Panic and paralysis warred within her. Call the police? What would she say? That she sent a strange text to a wrong number and now she was scared. They would call her crazy. And time. She had no time. 10 seconds. She moved as if underwater, each step a struggle against an unseen current. Her eyes fixed on her door's lock, a cheap piece of metal that suddenly seemed laughably useless. She reached for the knob, the brass cold against her sweaty palm. Her mind screamed at her not to do it, to hide, to barricade the door. But the voice on the phone, the cold certainty in his tone, told her that resistance was futile. Worse, it was dangerous. She turned the lock. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silence of her apartment. She opened the door just a crack. The man outside didn't move. He simply waited. He was tall, the top of his head nearly brushing the doorframe. He wore a dark suit, tailored with a precision that seemed to absorb the dim light of the hallway. The expensive fabric looked out of place against the peeling paint and stained carpet of her building. She couldn't see his face clearly, as he was framed by the hall light behind him, casting him in silhouette. But she could feel the weight of his gaze. Its intensity was a physical force, pressing in on her. "May I come in?" he asked, the same calm voice from the phone. It wasn't a real question. It was a formality. Elena didn't answer. She simply stepped back from the door, a movement of surrender. He entered, and the space instantly shrank. It was as if the very atmosphere bent around him. He brought the cold smell of the autumn night in with him, mixed with something else, the subtle, expensive scent of cologne, leather, and power. Behind him, another man, larger and broader, remained in the hallway, positioning himself just outside her door. A guard. A sentinel. The first man closed the door behind him, the dry sound sealing them inside the small apartment. The dim light from Elena's living room finally illuminated his face. She held her breath. He was not what she had expected. There was no thuggish brutality in his features. Instead, there was a severe, almost architectural handsomeness. High cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with a dark 5 o'clock shadow, and a straight nose. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her. They were a stormy gray, intelligent, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world not in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of assets and threats. And in that moment, She had no doubt which category he had placed her in. His gaze swept over her apartment, taking in every detail in an instant. The second-hand furniture, the stack of nursing textbooks, the faded photo of her parents on the bookshelf. His face remained impassive, but she felt utterly exposed, as if he could read her entire life in the clutter of her living room. "You're Elena Ricci," he stated, his gray eyes coming back to lock on her. She crossed her arms over her chest, a futile gesture of self-protection. "How do you know my name?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You sent me a message from a phone registered in your name. It wasn't difficult." He took a step toward her. She took a step back. "The more interesting question isn't how I know your name. The question is how you know Leo Malatesta's." Her stomach twisted. The way he pronounced the name with a cold precision, as if dissecting the word told her that those two words were the reason he was here. I heard it," she stammered, hating the weakness in her voice. "My patient. He's dying. He's delirious." "What patient?" His voice was sharp as a blade. "Mr. Rossi. He's 90 years old. He doesn't know what he's saying." The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "And what else did he say?" "Nothing. Just that. The name and something about a book. The Cypress Hills book," he finished for her, his voice barely a whisper. The air in the room seemed to grow colder. "And you, a nurse who overhears the ramblings of an old man, decide to send a text to a number that hasn't been in use for 50 years, asking for help for your brother." "I was desperate," she whispered, the truth raw and naked. "My brother. He's in trouble. I saw the name in Mr. Rossi's address book. I didn't think—" "No." He cut her off, taking another step, closing the space between them. Now she had to crane her neck back to look up at him. "You didn't think. Do you know what you've done, Elena? You've taken a match and struck it in the middle of a gunpowder warehouse." She could feel the heat radiating from him, see the fine weave of his suit. His gray eyes bored into her, searching for any sign of deceit. She felt a surge of anger rise through the fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice firmer now. "I don't know who you are. I just know that you're in my home, terrorizing me. I want you to leave." He laughed, a low, humorless sound that held no joy. "Leaving isn't an option. Not anymore. You opened a door to the past. And now, you're going to help me close it." "I can't help you. I don't know anything." "Oh, but you do," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know Mr. Rossi. And he, it seems, knows something I want. So you and I are going to pay your patient a visit." He turned toward the door. "Now." His words hung in the stale air of the apartment, an undeniable command. Now. The word echoed in Elena's mind, erasing all other thoughts. Pay a visit to Mr. Rossi. The idea was absurd, grotesque. To bring this man this walking danger in an expensive suit to the bedside of a frail, dying patient was a violation of everything she stood for, of every oath she had taken as a nurse. "No." The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. It was a whisper, but it was laden with the weight of her conviction. "Absolutely not. He's my patient. He's dying. I will not bring a stranger into his room in the middle of the night." The man, who had already been turning toward the door, paused. He turned back slowly, and the cold amusement was gone from his eyes. What remained was something far more primal, a chilling steel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I don't think you understand your position," he said, each syllable precise and sharp. "Your building is surrounded. Your phone, I assume, is now listening to this conversation. I know about your brother, Matteo. I know of his debt to a man named Anthony Gallo, who works for me. I know the deadline for payment was almost an hour ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Right now, Elena, the only thing stopping Mr. Gallo from breaking your brother's fingers is my patience, and it is wearing thin." The air left Elena's lungs as if she'd been punched. "Who works for me? The loan shark. The man with the broken glass voice. That casual violence and the calculated menace now standing in her living room. They were connected, and she was caught in the middle. Mateo's life wasn't in the hands of some low-level thug. It was in this man's hands. She felt the floor give way beneath her. The righteous anger she had felt a moment before dissolved, replaced by the bitter bile of fear. She looked at his face, at the predatory calm in his eyes, and she saw the truth. He wasn't bluffing. He held her brother's life like a chess piece, ready to sacrifice it without hesitation. What do you want with him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Mr. Rossi is a confused old man." "He may be confused," the man agreed, taking a step toward her. "But 60 years ago, he was the accountant for a man named Leo Malatesta. And Leo Malatesta betrayed my family." The word family carried a different weight on his lips. It wasn't about love and kinship. It was about power and legacy. He and Malatesta disappeared. And with them, a ledger. A book detailing that betrayal. We've looked for it for decades. And now a dying man starts whispering about it to his nurse. He stopped a few feet from her. So no, he is not just a confused old man. He is the last loose end of a very old story. And I intend to tie it up. The story unfolded before her, a dark tale of betrayal and revenge that stretched across generations. And she, through an act of blind desperation, had stumbled right into its final chapter. He held out his hand, palm up, a gesture that didn't ask but commanded. "Your car keys." She stared at his hand, then back at his face. There was no choice. She knew that. Every fighting instinct within her screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a betrayal. But the image of Mateo, the sound of his pained groan on the phone, that was the stronger instinct. Protection. With stiff, reluctant limbs, she reached for her purse on the kitchen chair. Her hands were shaking so badly the keyring jingled loudly as she pulled it out. She dropped it into his outstretched palm. His fingers closed over the keys, the warmth of his skin brushing hers for a brief instant. The contact was electric, shocking in its unsolicited intimacy. "Let's go," he said, turning away. She followed him out of the apartment, into the dimly lit hallway, where the hulking guard still waited, motionless as a statue. He didn't even glance at her as they descended the stairs. She felt like a prisoner being escorted to her own execution. Each step down felt like a step deeper into a world from which she could never emerge. The cold night air hit her as they stepped out of the building. The air smelled of impending rain. The black SUVs were still there, engines running, dark windows impenetrable. The back door of one of them swung open as they approached, a silent, choreographed gesture. The man gestured for her to get in. The vehicle's interior was a cocoon of black leather and silence. It smelled of wealth and something else, something sterile and controlled. She slid in, feeling the cool leather through her thin scrubs. He got in after her, his presence filling the confined space. The door closed with a solid, muted thud, cutting off the sound of the outside world. The silence inside the car was more oppressive than any shout. A driver with an impassive face sat at the wheel, separated from them by a dark glass partition. She was completely trapped. "Where is the facility?" His voice cut through the silence. "It's a hospice, St. Jude's, on Oak Street," she answered, her voice low. He picked up a small earpiece, speaking in low, rapid Italian. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was one of command. When he finished, he turned to her, the glare of the streetlights passing over his face, casting shifting shadows on his angular features. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly, the need to know her captor's name overriding her fear. He watched her for a long moment, as if deciding if she was worthy of that information. "Marcello," he said finally. "Marcello Moretti." The name meant nothing to her, but she stored it away, repeating it in her mind. Marcello. The name sounded like polished marble, cold and hard. "When we get there," he continued, his tone now strictly business, "you will do exactly as I say. You will lead us to his room. You will not speak to anyone unless it is absolutely necessary. You will not do anything to draw attention. If you think about calling for help, remember that my men will be everywhere. and remember that your brother's well-being depends on your complete cooperation. Is that clear? She swallowed, the lump in her throat tight and painful. She just nodded, unable to form words. He leaned back against the seat, seeming satisfied. The car glided through the sleeping city, a silent shark in dark waters. Elena stared out the window at the blurred lights, at the houses where people slept in their beds, oblivious to the dark worlds that existed just beneath the surface of their normal lives. An hour ago, she had been one of them. Now, she was sitting next to a man named Marcello, on her way to use her dying patient as a key to unlock a 60-year-old bloody secret. And the worst part? She was the one leading him to the lock. The drive to the St. Jude's hospice facility was an eternity contained in 15 minutes. For Elena, every red light was a torturous pause, every turn a deeper descent into the betrayal she was about to commit. She felt dirty, complicit. The white scrubs she wore, once a symbol of care and trust, now felt like a costume, a lie that burned against her skin. Her gaze was fixed on her own hands, clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Marcello remained silent beside her, a still and watchful presence. He didn't look at her, but she felt the weight of his attention, like the heat from a black sun. He stared out the window, observing the city pass with an expression of ownership, like a king surveying his domain. This was his world, and she was just a temporary trespasser, a tool to be used and undoubtedly discarded. The thought made her shiver, a chill that had nothing to do with the car's temperature. When the SUV slowed, turning into the familiar entrance of St. Jude's, Elena's heart began to hammer in a frantic, painful rhythm. The 3-story brick building looked different at night, darker, its windows like vacant eyes. Usually, arriving here brought her a sense of purpose. Tonight, it brought a wave of nausea. The driver didn't stop at the main entrance. Following Elena's murmured directions, he continued around the back, pulling up near a service door she used for late shifts. It was less visible, away from the main reception. The calculated efficiency of it all sickened her. "Remember what I said." Marcello's voice was a low whisper beside her, pulling her back to the claustrophobic reality of the car. No surprises. The door opened. The cold night air washed over her, and for a moment she was paralyzed. Stepping out of that car felt like an irrevocable step. Marcello exited from the other side, moving with a fluid, predatory grace. He waited for her, impatience a palpable aura around him. On stiff legs, she got out. The burly bodyguard, who had been in the front seat, now stood beside Marcello, his eyes scanning the darkness. Another black SUV had pulled up silently behind theirs, and 2 more men in suits emerged, positioning themselves in the shadows. They moved with a trained unity, like a wolf pack. "After you," Marcello said, gesturing toward the service door. Her hands shook so badly she could barely insert her keycard into the electronic lock. The green light blinked and the door clicked open. The familiar smell of St. Jude's hit her, a mixture of lavender disinfectant, cafeteria food, and the indefinable scent of end of life. It was usually a smell of routine. Tonight, it smelled of sacrilege. She led them inside, into the silent, dimly lit corridor. The only light came from the small safety lamps at the baseboards, which cast long, distorted shadows. The only sound was the soft hum of machines and the muffled sound of their own footsteps on the polished floor. It was a sleeping world, vulnerable, and she was leading the wolves into the fold. The bodyguard remained by the door, a dark sentinel. Marcello followed her closely as she walked the hallway she knew so well. She could feel his presence right behind her, a pressure on her back. He moved without a sound, a remarkable feat for a man his size. They passed the nursing station, dark and empty. The night nurse, Brenda, was probably on her rounds in the other wing. A small blessing. Elena didn't know how she would have looked a colleague in the eye. Shame was a hot coal in her chest. Mr. Rossi's room was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, a sliver of soft light spilling from within. Every step toward that door was torture. She could feel Marcello's eyes on her, analyzing every hesitation, every shaky breath. She stopped in front of the door, her hand hovering over the wood. She couldn't do it. A problem? Marcello's whisper was a cold breath in her ear. He was closer than she'd realized. "This is wrong," she whispered back, her voice thick. "What's wrong?" he answered, his voice dangerously low. "Is making promises for a brother who can't stay out of trouble. What's wrong is thinking you can touch my family, and there will be no consequences. Now, go in." The mention of Matteo was like a bucket of ice water. The choice was once again taken from her. Clenching her jaw until it ached, she gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was as she had left it. Silent, except for the soft, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor and the sigh of the oxygen concentrator. Mr. Rossi lay in the bed, a frail shape under the thin white sheet. His breathing was shallow, but steady. He seemed to be sleeping peacefully. Marcello entered behind her, his gray eyes sweeping the room, taking in the medical paraphernalia, the crucifix hanging on the wall, the yellowed photo of a young woman on the bedside table. He moved to the side of the bed, opposite Elena, his eyes fixed on the old man's wrinkled face. There was a predatory stillness about him, the patience of a spider waiting in its web. Elena went to Mr. Rossi's side, her usual spot. She took his wrist by instinct, her fingers finding the faint, thready pulse. An act of normalcy in an insane situation. "Rossi." Marcello's voice cut through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it had a piercing quality that seemed designed to cut through the mists of unconsciousness. The old man's eyes didn't open. Marcello looked at Elena, one eyebrow raised. The message was clear. Make him talk. Elena felt a wave of panic. She couldn't force a dying man to speak. She leaned over the bed. "Mr. Rossi," she said softly, her nurse's voice. "It's me, Elena. Are you awake?" The old man's eyelids fluttered. He groaned softly, a sound of discomfort. "Ask him about the book," Marcello commanded in a harsh whisper. Elena hesitated. Her heart rebelled. She looked at Marcello, shaking her head subtly. "No." A dark shadow passed over Marcello's face. He took out his cell phone, typed something quickly, and brought it to his ear. He never took his eyes off her. "Gallo," he said into the phone, his voice still low but now laced with a thread of steel. "Yes. Her brother. I think he needs some encouragement. Start with the little finger on his left hand." Elena's blood ran cold. "No!" The cry was torn from her, a strangled sound of pure terror. "Stop, please! I'll do it!" Marcello's eyes remained locked on hers for a long, tense second. Then, he spoke into the phone. "Wait." He put the device back in his pocket. The threat hung between them, more real and immediate than ever. With tears burning her eyes, Elena turned back to Mr. Rossi. The shame and self-loathing were a bitter taste in her mouth. "Mr. Rossi," she said, her voice trembling. The book you mentioned. From Cypress Hills. What is it?" The old man's eyelids drifted open, just a crack. His cloudy eyes shifted, trying to focus. They moved past Elena and landed on the tall, dark figure on the other side of the bed. A flicker of recognition and of pure, ancient terror flashed in the old man's eyes. His frail body stiffened. The rhythm on the cardiac monitor quickened, the beeps becoming faster, more urgent. "Moretti." The name was a puff of air, a ghost of a sound exhaled from his lungs. Mr. Rossi stared at Marcello, and for an instant he was no longer a senile old man. He was a man looking into the face of his worst nightmare, a nightmare he thought he had left behind more than half a century ago. The name Moretti hung in the sterile air of the room, heavy with the weight of decades of fear. The sharp, accelerated sound of the cardiac monitor was a frantic counterpoint to the tense silence that fell. The beeps were like an alarm, an electronic scream that mirrored the silent panic on Mr. Rossi's face. Marcello didn't move. He remained by the bed, a statue in a dark suit, but the intensity emanating from him deepened. His gray eyes were fixed on the old man, an expression of predatory focus on his face. He had his confirmation. This man, in this bed, knew exactly who he was. "Yes," Marcello said, his voice low and resonant. "Moretti." It's been a long time, Angelo. The use of Mr. Rossi's first name was like a blow. Angelo Rossi. The accountant. The loose end. Elena felt a chill, despite the stuffy warmth of the room. She was a spectator to a play that had begun before her parents were even born. A drama of ghosts and ancient sins. Mr. Rossi tried to speak, his wrinkled lips moving without sound. His eyes, wide with terror, were locked on Marcello. His hand fluttered on the sheet, his thin fingers twitching, as if trying to pull away from a danger he could no longer escape. "The book, Angelo," Marcello continued, his tone relentless but strangely calm. "Leo Malatesta took it. Where is it?" The old man shook his head, a tiny, trembling movement on the pillow. "Dead," he whispered, his voice a rustle. "Leo. Dead a long time." "I know he's dead." Marcello's patience was ice-thin. "But the book isn't. Where did you hide it?" "Don't know." Mr. Rossi's whimper was pathetic. "Swear. I don't know. He took it. I ran. I never saw him again." Elena watched, her heart tight in a knot of pity and fear. She was a nurse. Her instinct was to intervene, to soothe her patient, to tell Marcello to stop. But fear held her paralyzed. Fear for Matteo. Fear of this man whose calmness was more terrifying than any shout. The beeps of the monitor continued to accelerate, a dangerous rhythm. Marcello leaned forward, placing his hands on the bed rail. The movement was slow, deliberate, yet freighted with restrained menace. "Don't lie to me, Angelo. Lying is a mistake people only make once with me. Malatesta was a traitor, but he wasn't a fool. He wouldn't have kept the only proof of his treachery. He would have given it to you. The accountant. The man no one would look for. The man who could disappear." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sliced through the air. "I've searched your entire life. Every apartment, every house, every safety deposit box. Nothing. So where is it?" Mr. Rossi's words came out in a ragged, gasping sob. He made me promise. Protect it. For my family. For my life." "Your family is gone, and your life is ending," Marcello stated, not with cruelty, but as an undeniable fact. "The promise is dead. Where is the book?" The cardiac monitor let out a high-pitched, continuous shriek. The green line that had once jumped in peaks and valleys was now a flat, unrelenting line. "Cardiac arrest." Elena's training took over, a conditioned reflex that overrode fear. In an instant, she was no longer a hostage. She was a nurse. "Get back!" she yelled at Marcello, shoving him aside with a strength she didn't know she possessed. He stumbled back, surprised by her sudden ferocity. She leaned over Mr. Rossi, checking for a pulse at his neck. Nothing. She reached for the red emergency button above the bed, the code blue that would flood the room with doctors and nurses in seconds. "Don't touch that button!" Marcello's voice was like the crack of a whip. She froze, her hand hovering inches from the alarm. She turned to face him, her chest heaving. "He's dying. He needs help." "He was already dying," Marcello replied, his gray eyes fixed on her, cold as stone. "And he was my only lead. I will not have this place swarming with doctors before I get what I need." The monstrosity of his words hit her. He would let him die. He would force her to stand here and watch her patient die, all for a damned book. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice low and filled with fury. "This is murder." "No, this is consequence," he shot back, taking a step toward her. "He lived for 60 years on time he stole from my family. His time is up." But something in old Angelo Rossi was still fighting. His eyes opened one last time, a final effort of will. They found Elena's, bypassing Marcello. There was desperation in them, a final plea. His hand rose from the sheet, trembling, and pointed to something behind her, to the small bedside table. His lips moved, forming a single, silent word, meant only for her. "Photo." Then, a final breath rattled in his chest, a small sigh, and his eyes went glassy, fixed on nothing. The silence in the room was broken only by the hum of machines and the unending, high-pitched tone of the monitor. Elena stared at Mr. Rossi's lifeless face, and something inside her broke. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, running hot and silent down her face. She had failed him. She had betrayed him, bringing death into his room. Marcello looked at the body, then at the monitor. His expression was one of cold frustration. He showed no remorse, no pity, only the irritation of a man whose objective had been thwarted at the last second. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. His eyes then settled on Elena, on her tear-streaked face. He watched her for a moment, his head tilted. "What did he say?" he asked. Elena swallowed. A sob caught in her throat. She shook her head. "Nothing. He's gone." The lie came easier than she expected. It was a small act of rebellion, a final service to the man she had failed to protect. She would not give him what he wanted. But Marcello was not an easy man to fool. His eyes followed the direction Mr. Rossi's finger had pointed, to the bedside table. He walked over, picking up the single photo there. It was an old, faded portrait of a smiling young woman, her dark hair pinned up in a 1950s style. He turned the cheap silver frame over. A small piece of cardboard held the photo in place, worn and yellowed with age. With a flick of his thumb, he removed it. He wasn't looking at the back of the photo. He was looking at the cardboard itself. On it, faded and barely legible, was a series of numbers, written in a fine, neat hand. 24-8-14. He stared at the numbers, then back at Elena. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "I think," he said softly, showing her the piece of cardboard, "that he did say something after all." The numbers on the piece of cardboard seemed insignificant. 24-8-14. 3 numbers separated by hyphens. To Elena, they meant nothing. But to Marcello, judging by the predatory gleam in his eyes, they were the treasure map. He had found his clue. Elena backed away from the bed, putting distance between herself, Marcello, and Mr. Rossi's lifeless body. The shrill tone of the monitor still filled the air, an electronic lament for the life that was gone. The sound was driving her mad. With a sharp movement, she reached over and switched the machine off. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. And suddenly, the enormity of what had happened hit her with the force of a wave. A man was dead, and she was the cause. If she hadn't sent that stupid text. "Don't delude yourself." Marcello's voice cut through her thoughts, so precise it was as if he'd heard them. He was watching her, his gray eyes missing none of her anguish. "That man was on borrowed time. I didn't kill him. Time did. I just asked the questions that needed to be asked before he was gone." His cold logic was obscene. She looked at him, the ache in her chest turning into an icy fury. "You terrorized him to death. You used me to do it. There's nothing you can say that will justify it." He tucked the piece of cardboard into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, a final gesture of possession. "I'm not seeking justification. I'm seeking a book." He moved toward her, his imposing presence shrinking the already small room. "And thanks to you, I'm one step closer. Now we're leaving. We have work to do." "Work to do?" she repeated, her voice full of disbelief. "A man just died in front of me. My brother is still—" She stopped, the unspoken threat hanging over them. "Your brother is safe for now," Marcello said. "He will remain that way as long as you continue to be useful. And you have now become exponentially more useful." He stopped right in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "These numbers, what do they mean to you?" She shook her head. "Nothing." "Think, Elena. An accountant, a man obsessed with records, with order. He wouldn't leave a random number. It's a code, a location, a safe deposit box key, an address, the number of a grave in Cypress Hills." The mention of the cemetery sent a shiver down her spine. The idea of searching for a dusty ledger among the dead was macabre. "I told you I don't know." "Maybe not consciously," he murmured, more to himself. His eyes studied her with a new intensity, as if he were trying to see through her skin, directly into her memories. But Rossi trusted you. He gave you the words. He pointed to the photo. Maybe he said more. Things you dismissed as delirium. Her mind reeled, replaying every interaction with Mr. Rossi over the past few weeks. The rambling stories about the war, the whispers about a woman named Sophia, the moments of lucidity, and the long hours of silence. Was there something there? A detail she'd overlooked. "We need a place to work," Marcello declared, making a decision. "Your apartment isn't safe. My enemies, the people who also want this book, may have already tracked you." He took her elbow, his grip firm, the touch not violent but unquestionably controlling. "You're coming with me." Panic returned in full force. Go with him. Where? Into his world? To be locked away, to become his permanent prisoner? "No," she protested, trying to pull away from his grasp. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You got what you wanted. Just let me go. Let my brother go." He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You still don't understand, do you? You are what I want. Until I have that book in my hands, you are my only connection to it. You are my insurance policy. Letting you go would be foolish, and I am not a foolish man." His hand tightened on her elbow, pulling her toward the door. "We need to be out of here before the night nurse makes her rounds and finds our friend." He gestured with his head toward the body on the bed. The reality of the situation hit her. They had to leave. If they were found here, with a dead patient, the questions would be endless, and she had no answers she could give. She stopped struggling, her body going limp in defeat. He led her out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. The hallway was as silent and empty as before. They retraced their steps, past the sleeping nursing station, toward the service door where they had entered. The bodyguard was still there, an unmoving sentinel. He opened the door for them without a word. The cold night air was a shock, but also a blast of reality. They got into the SUV, the door closing behind them, sealing her once again in that cocoon of leather and silence. The car pulled away from St. Jude's, leaving behind the building where a part of Elena's soul felt like it had died along with Mr. Rossi. She stared at the reflection of her own face in the dark window glass. There was a stranger in the eyes that looked back at her, a woman with a pale, haunted face. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice empty. "Somewhere safe," Marcello replied. "My home." My home. The words sounded like a prison sentence. She imagined a walled compound, a fortress of concrete and steel, a place from which there would be no escape. They drove for nearly half an hour, leaving the city limits and entering an area of wooded hills where the houses were large and set back from the road, hidden behind imposing gates. The SUV slowed and turned into a private driveway, marked by 2 plain stone pillars. A heavy wrought iron gate swung open for them, revealing a long winding drive flanked by tall cypress trees that stood like black soldiers against the pre-dawn sky. At the end of the drive, the house appeared. It was not the fortress she had imagined. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a structure of glass, steel, and stone that seemed to grow organically out of the hillside. Lights on inside cast a warm, inviting glow. It looked elegant, sophisticated, and somehow, that was even more disturbing. It was the lion's den disguised as a sanctuary. The car stopped under a covered portico. The driver opened the door for Marcello, who got out and then turned to offer Elena his hand. She stared at his hand, a gesture of courtesy so bizarre and out of place it bordered on the surreal. She ignored it, getting out of the car on her own. "Welcome to my home, Elena," he said, his voice devoid of any irony. "For now, it's yours as well." He led her inside. The interior was as breathtaking as the exterior. High ceilings, polished marble floors, tasteful works of art on the walls. The air smelled of beeswax and fresh coffee. An older woman, with her gray hair in a tight bun and wearing a simple black dress, appeared in the foyer. Her expression was stern, but her eyes were sharp. "Marcello," she said, her voice holding a faint Italian accent. Her eyes moved to Elena, taking her in from head to toe. "Rosa, this is Elena. She will be staying with us for a while, Marcello explained. Prepare the guest suite in the east wing, and bring us coffee in my study. Rosa nodded, asking no questions. She turned to Elena. Come with me, Signorina. I will show you to your room. Elena looked at Marcello, a silent question in her eyes. Go with her, he said. Get some rest. We'll try to solve our little puzzle in the morning. She followed Rosa up a floating staircase to the second floor. The room was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed, silk sheets, an ensuite marble bathroom, and an entire wall of glass overlooking the dark gardens. It was a cage. A luxurious, beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. After Rosa left, Elena went to the window. The glass door slid open to a private balcony. She stepped out, feeling the damp air on her face. There were no bars, no visible fences from here. For a wild moment, she thought about running. But then she looked down. The garden was meticulously landscaped, but beyond it, in the gloom, she could make out the subtle glint of wire atop a high wall. And standing near the edge of the woods was the silhouette of a man. Watching. There was no escape. She backed into the room, her heart heavy as a stone. She was a prisoner, and her jailer was the most dangerous man she had ever met. A man who now believed that she, and she alone, was the key to unlocking his family's final secret. Sleep wouldn't come. How could it? Elena sat on the edge of the luxurious bed, the silk of the sheets feeling cool and alien against her skin. The room was silent, a deep, insulated quiet that was vastly different from the silence of her small apartment. There were always the distant sounds of the city, the familiar hum of life. Here, the silence was absolute, a wall separating her from everything she knew. She stood and paced the room, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. She felt like an animal in an unfamiliar cage, testing the boundaries of her confinement. Every object in the room spoke of a wealth she could barely comprehend. The designer lamp, the toiletries in the bathroom that likely cost more than her weekly groceries, the cloud-soft towels. It was all designed for comfort, but every detail only reinforced the chasm between her world and Marcello's. When the first gray fingers of dawn began to filter through the glass window, she finally gave in to exhaustion. She didn't get under the covers. She curled up in an armchair in the corner, still wearing her nurse's scrubs, now wrinkled and imbued with the sweat and stress of the night. It was a flimsy armor, the last vestige of who she was before Marcello Moretti had blown her life apart. She fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep, a brief erasure of reality. She awoke to a soft knock on the door. Daylight now flooded the room, making her blink. The same woman, Rosa, entered carrying a tray. On it was a steaming pot of coffee, fresh pastries, fruit, and a small vase with a single white rose. The juxtaposition of that domestic, civilized scene with the brutality of the previous night was jarring. "The master sent your breakfast," Rosa said, her voice neutral. She placed the tray on a small table. "He will be expecting you in his study in an hour." Rosa's eyes revealed nothing, not sympathy, not curiosity. It was the face of someone accustomed to not asking questions, to seeing the unseen. How many other guests had she served? "I need my clothes," Elena said, her voice hoarse from sleep. "I need a shower." Rosa nodded. "There are some things in the closet. They should do for now. We will have your belongings sent for later." After Rosa left, Elena opened the built-in closet. Inside, hanging with meticulous space between them, were several sets of women's clothes linen trousers, cashmere sweaters, a simple black dress. All high quality, tasteful, and in her size. The presumption of it infuriated her. It was as if he had anticipated her arrival, as if she were just another piece to be moved onto his chessboard. Despite the anger, the need to shed the uniform of the night before was overwhelming. It was as if she could wash away the smell of death and betrayal. She took a quick shower, the hot water a blessing on her tense skin. She dressed in a gray cashmere sweater and black trousers. The clothes were soft and comfortable, but they felt like a costume, the disguise of a woman who belonged in this place. When she looked in the mirror, the woman who stared back was a pale, haunted stranger. An hour later, She went downstairs. The house was silent, save for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Rosa was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs and led her, without a word, down a hallway to a pair of dark wood doors. Marcello's study was like the rest of the house, a blend of modern power and timeless elegance. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a large polished mahogany desk, and a glass wall overlooking a Zen rock garden. The air smelled of strong coffee and leather. Marcello was standing by the window, his back to her, speaking on the phone in low Italian. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a dark linen shirt and gray trousers, which made him look less like a mob boss and more like a tech CEO. But the aura of danger still clung to him like a second skin. He ended the call and turned. His gray eyes swept over her, taking in the change of clothes. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the 2 leather armchairs positioned in front of his desk. She remained standing. "My brother, I want to speak to him." Marcello watched her for a moment, then picked up his cell phone from the desk. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Yeah," a voice said. It was the oily voice of the loan shark, Gallo. "Let me talk to him," Marcello said. There was a brief rustle, and then Matteo's frightened, confused voice filled the room. "Hello?" "Matteo, it's me, Elena," she said, rushing toward the desk. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "Lena, what's going on? Where are you? These guys, they brought me to some place, I don't know where. They haven't hurt me, but I'm scared." "It's going to be okay, Matteo," she said, trying to force a confidence into her voice she didn't feel. "Just do what they say. I'm going to fix this. I promise." "Fix what? What did you do, Lena?" Marcello reached out and ended the call. "He's fine," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Now sit. We have work to do." The brief conversation with her brother, rather than calming her, only solidified the reality of her situation. Matteo was her leash, and Marcello held it tightly. Defeated, she sank into the leather chair. Marcello sat across from her, picking up the small piece of cardboard with the numbers. He placed it on the polished desk between them. 24-8-14, he said. "I've been running these numbers all night. It's not an address. It's not a birth date. I checked the burial records for Cypress Hills. No plot matches. So what is it?" He stared at her, waiting, as if she held the magic answer. "I've told you. I don't know," she repeated, frustration rising. "It could be nothing. It could be a laundry ticket number from 1950. "No," he said with absolute certainty. Rossi was an accountant. He thought in numbers, in ledgers, in pages, in lines. This is not random. He leaned forward, the intensity in his eyes pinning her. "I want you to tell me everything he said for the past few weeks. Every murmur, every story, every name. No matter how nonsensical it seemed. Your mind is now the crime scene, and we are going to examine it piece by piece." And so it began. For hours, she talked. She described the daily routine, Mr. Rossi's pained groans, his long stretches of silence. She told him about his rambling stories of the war, of the cold in Italy, of a woman named Sophia, whose name he whispered in his dreams. She told him everything, feeling emptier with each word. Marcello listened in absolute silence, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. He just absorbed, his mind clearly working, connecting dots she couldn't see. When she finally fell silent, exhausted, he leaned back in his chair. "Sophia," he said, the word sounding strange in his voice. The photo on the bedside table. It was his wife. He stood and went to one of the bookshelves, pulling out a thick, leather-bound book. He flipped through it. The Malatesta family also had a Sophia. He returned to the desk, opening the book. It was an old photo album. He turned a page and pushed the book toward her. The black and white photo showed a group of people at a picnic. In the center, a young woman was laughing. It was the same woman from Mr. Rossi's photo. "Sophia Malatesta, Leo's sister," Marcello said, "and my grandfather's promised bride." Leo's betrayal wasn't just about business. It was personal. He stole the book. and he stole the woman my grandfather was meant to marry. Elena stared at the photo, at the laughing woman, and felt a pang of sadness. Another life destroyed by these men and their codes of honor. "This doesn't help us find the book," she said, pushing the album away. "Maybe it does," Marcello said thoughtfully. He picked up the cardboard again. An accountant, a book, 24, 8, 14. His eyes widened with a sudden understanding. "It's not a grave. It's not an address. My God, it's a passage." He stood abruptly. "Get up, we're going for a walk." "A walk? Where?" He looked at her, and for the first time, there was something resembling excitement in his gray eyes. "To the library," he said. "Angelo Rossi didn't hide a ledger. He hid a passage inside a book, and I think I know which one." The library was not in the main house. Marcello led her from the study, down a glass-walled corridor that connected the main structure to a separate wing she hadn't noticed before. It was a circular building, constructed from the same dark stone and glass as the house, nestled among the cypress trees. It looked like a modern temple dedicated to knowledge. The inside took her breath away. It was a 2-story space, with curved walls lined from floor to ceiling with books. A wrought iron spiral staircase led up to the second-level catwalk. The smell of old leather, paper, and beeswax was intoxicating. In the center of the room, under a circular skylight, sat a massive wooden reading table. It was the most beautiful, peaceful place Elena had ever seen, and somehow, the most dangerous. This was Marcello's stronghold, the center of his power. That knowledge wasn't just literary. She felt in her bones that these books held histories and secrets as dark as the one he sought. "My grandfather built this place," Marcello said, his voice lower here, almost reverent. He walked to the center of the room, his footsteps echoing softly in the silence. He believed that knowledge was the only weapon that never rusted. He ran his fingers along the spine of a book. He collected first editions, classics, poetry. Elena remained near the door, feeling like a desecrator in this sacred space. "What are we doing here?" Marcello's eyes met hers from across the room. "Angelo Rossi was a religious man, you said. There was a crucifix on his wall, and he was in a Catholic hospice. He loved a woman named Sophia." He began to walk along the shelves, his fingers gliding over the spines. He wouldn't hide a passage about betrayal in just any novel. He'd hide it in something that meant something to him. Something about redemption, loss, love, and faith. He stopped, his hand resting on a single dark red leather volume. He pulled it from the shelf with care. Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. He turned and walked toward her, holding the book like a relic. A man's journey through hell to find his lost love. He placed the ancient book on the large reading table and opened it. The pages were thin, almost translucent, the edges gilded. The text was in Italian, the typeface elegant and old. "What do the numbers mean?" she whispered, moving closer to the table, drawn in against her will. "It's the only language an accountant like Rossi would know would transcend time. Canto, stanza, line." Marcello explained, his voice low and tight with excitement. "It's not 24, 8, 14. It's Canto 24, stanza 8, line 14. He began to flip through the pages with a surprising speed, his long fingers moving with a familiarity that surprised her. He knew this book. He wasn't just searching, he was navigating. He stopped on a page, running his finger down the text. Inferno, Canto 24, the Circle of Thieves. A dark smile touched his lips. The irony. He counted the stanzas, then the lines. His finger came to rest on a single line of text. He didn't read it aloud. Instead, he picked up a small magnifying glass that lay on the table and examined the line closely. Elena leaned in to look. To the naked eye, it looked no different from the rest of the text, but under the lens, she could see it. There were tiny, almost invisible pinpricks under certain letters. Marks made with a fine needle, so subtle they could be mistaken for imperfections in the paper. "He was a master," Marcello muttered, a note of reluctant respect in his voice. "Decades. This book has sat on this shelf for decades, and we never knew." "What does it say?" she asked. He picked up a pen and a slip of paper. He jotted down the marked letters one by one. SottolapietradisoFia. It's Italian, he said, though it was obvious. He stared at the string of letters, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wrote out the words, separating them. Sotto la pietra di Sofia. He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. Under the stone of Sofia. Elena felt a chill. His fiancée? Leo's sister? Yes. He leaned back, the puzzle finally solved. My grandfather, in his grief, built a memorial to her in the gardens. A small statue of an angel on a stone base. He called it Sophia's Lament. He looked out the library's glass wall, toward the gardens now bathed in morning sunlight. The book isn't in a safe. It's not in a grave. It's been here the whole time, buried just a few yards from where we stand. The silence in the library was thick with the revelation, a 60-year search, and the answer was in a line of poetry and under a statue in the garden. Come on, Marcello said, moving toward the door. They left the library and stepped into the cool morning air. The garden was immaculate, a maze of trimmed hedges and flower beds. He led her down a gravel path to a more secluded part of the grounds, shaded by an ancient oak tree. And there it was, a small statue of a weeping angel, its head bowed in sorrow, wings folded. It stood on a simple granite pedestal. The stone was covered in moss, aged by time. It was a place of melancholy beauty. Marcello approached the pedestal. He ran his hand over the stone, then knelt, examining the base. There was a thin, almost invisible line where the base met the earth. He took a small pocket knife from his pocket and inserted it into the crack, using it as a lever. With a low groan of stone against stone, a section of the base moved. It revealed a small, hollowed-out compartment beneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was a rectangular package. Marcello reached into the compartment, Elena's heart pounding in her chest. He carefully lifted the package out. His hands, steady and precise, unwrapped the aged oilcloth. And there it was, a simple black leather-bound ledger, just as she had imagined. It looked like nothing special, but she knew the object in Marcello Moretti's hands was an artifact of betrayal, a book that people had died for, and for which he had turned her life upside down. He opened it. The pages were covered in a neat accountant's hand, rows upon rows of numbers and names. He flipped through a few pages, his eyes scanning the contents. A slow breath escaped his lips. He closed the book. "This is it," he said, his voice low and filled with a dark satisfaction. He stood up, holding the book like a scepter. He turned to Elena. For a long moment, they just looked at each other under the shade of the oak tree. The hunt was over. The secret was unearthed. And Elena was suddenly struck by a terrifying question. He had what he wanted. What was going to happen to her now? She was no longer useful. And in Marcello's world, what happened to things that were no longer useful? The weight of that thought hit her with physical force, stealing the air from her lungs. She was no longer useful. The phrase echoed in the silence of the garden. In Marcello's world, usefulness was synonymous with survival. Now she was just a witness, a loose end, just as Mr. Rossi had been. She looked at Marcello's face, trying to read his expression, but the elation of triumph had already faded from his eyes, replaced by a calculating calm that was impossible to decipher. He held the ledger in one hand, his thumb tracing the worn leather cover. It was the end of a lifelong quest, the closing of a 60-year-old family wound. And she was the only person outside of his organization who knew it. Her survival instincts, suppressed by shock and fear for the past 12 hours, suddenly screamed. She took a step back, a small instinctive movement. His gray eyes locked onto hers, noticing the shift, the renewed fear in her posture. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, his head tilted slightly, like a predator assessing prey it didn't know whether to strike or release. "My brother," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. If she was going to die, she needed to know. "Will you let him go now?" Marcello took a step toward her, closing the small distance she had created. The book was still in his hand. "I am a man of my word, Elena. Your brother will be released. His debt is forgiven." He took out his cell phone, dialed a number, and brought it to his ear, never breaking eye contact with her. "Gallo, let him go. Take him home. Make sure he gets there safely. If a hair on his head is touched, I will hold you personally responsible." He paused. "Yes, the debt is settled. For good." He hung up and pocketed the phone. The ease with which he commanded, the finality in his voice. It was frightening. He could erase a debt and free a man as easily as he could order a finger to be broken. A pinprick of relief, small and trembling, bloomed in Elena's chest. Matteo was safe. That part of the nightmare was over, which left her alone, facing the nightmare's architect. "And me?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "What happens to me now?" He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. "That," he said finally, his voice low, "is a more complicated question." He began walking back toward the house, indicating with a nod of his head for her to follow. She obeyed, her legs feeling like lead. Each step felt like it was taking her toward a verdict. They didn't go back to the study. He led her through the house, into a spacious living room with a glass wall that opened onto a terrace overlooking the valley below. The morning sun flooded the space, making it feel warm and peaceful, a stark contradiction to the turmoil inside her. He placed the ledger on a glass coffee table as if it were a trophy. Then he turned to her. "You have two options," he said, his tone now that of a businessman discussing a contract. "The first is the one I promised. I give you money, more than you have ever seen, enough for you and your brother to disappear. New identities, a new start somewhere far from here. You will forget this night ever happened. You will forget my name, and you will live your life." It sounded like a dream, a way out, a chance to go back to normal, or a better version of it. But she heard the unspoken caveat in his voice. "And the second option?" she asked, her heart pounding. He moved closer to her, stopping so near she could see the tiny flecks of a darker gray in his irises. "The second option," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate register, "is you stay." The suggestion stunned her. "Stay? Why? I'm no longer useful to you." "That's where you're mistaken," he replied. His eyes traveled over her, but it wasn't the assessing gaze from before. There was something else there now, something that resembled admiration. "In the last 12 hours, I've watched you under a pressure that would break most men I know. You lied to me, even when you were terrified. You defended your patient, even when you knew it put your brother at risk. You bargained with the devil to save your family." He paused. "You're not a tool, Elena. You're a weapon, and you don't even know it." She shook her head, confused. "I don't understand. My world is built on loyalty and strength, and you, a nurse living in a crumbling apartment, have shown more of those qualities than most of my soldiers. I can't just let that go." His hand rose, and for a moment she thought he would touch her. Instead, it just hovered in the air between them. "I don't want to let you go." The confession was so unexpected, so raw, it left her speechless. This man, this monster, this architect of her pain, was asking her to stay, not as a prisoner, but as... what? "What are you offering?" she whispered. "I'm offering you a life where you never have to worry about bills, or loan sharks, or your brother's safety again. I'm offering protection, my protection." His eyes intensified. "And I'm offering myself." The possessiveness in his voice was unmistakable. It wasn't a business proposition. It was a claim. Elena's mind reeled. It was madness. To stay meant entering his world of violence and darkness. It meant becoming a part of it. But to leave, the thought of going back to her old life, to the constant struggle, the loneliness, it suddenly felt empty. For the first time in years, she didn't just feel like a caregiver, a problem solver. In his presence, as terrifying as it was, she felt seen. "You're a killer," she said, the accusation weak on her lips. "I'm a survivor," he corrected, "just like you." He finally closed the distance, his fingers brushing against her cheek. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of warmth through her that was shocking. It was not a touch of ownership, but of discovery. His gray eyes searched hers, and for the first time, she didn't see the mob boss. She saw the man. A man forged by loneliness and power, who saw in her an equal. "You don't have to give me an answer now," he whispered, his thumb stroking the line of her jaw. "But know this. If you go, I will let you go. But if you stay—" He leaned in, his mouth hovering inches from hers. His scent enveloped her, coffee and cologne and the raw male essence of him. "I will never let you go again." Her world narrowed to that moment, to the space between their lips. The fear was still there, a low hum in her veins. But something new, and far more dangerous, was rising alongside it. A desire she thought had long since died. She didn't kiss him, and he didn't kiss her. But the promise of the kiss hung between them, more potent than any touch. He pulled back, giving her space to breathe. "The choice is yours, Elena." He turned and walked to the glass wall, looking out at his domain. He left her there, in the middle of the sun-drenched room, with her heart beating like a war drum. To go or to stay, to flee the darkness or to dance with it. The choice was hers, and for the first time in her life, she had no idea what to do. Elena stood motionless for what could have been minutes or an hour. The sun moved across the sky, shifting the shadows in the room, but inside her, time had stopped. Marcello's offer, the impossible choice he had given her, spun in her mind like a vortex. To go. The word whispered promises of safety, of normalcy. She could take Matteo and disappear. Start over in a city where the name Moretti meant nothing, where the night didn't bring the sound of black SUVs. She could go back to being just Elena Ricci, the nurse. A life of quiet order. But the idea, which should have been a relief, now felt gray, washed out. It would be an escape, not a freedom. She would live forever looking over her shoulder, forever remembering the gray eyes that had seen her in a way no one else ever had. To stay. The word was a danger, a seduction. To stay meant accepting his world, with all its darkness and violence. It meant entangling herself with a man whose morality was a labyrinth with no exit. It would be a life in the shadow of power, an existence in a gilded cage. But it also meant no longer being alone. It meant having a force of nature by her side who, for some unfathomable reason, wanted her. Not for something she could do for him, but for who she was. He had called her a weapon. He had called her an equal. She walked to the coffee table and looked down at the ledger, the object that had destroyed and remade her life in less than a day. It was a symbol of the past, of old debts and betrayals. Marcello had spent his life shackled to it. Now that he had it, what would he do? She turned and found him watching her. He hadn't moved from the window. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked, pointing to the book. "Use it," he answered simply. "The names in this book, they're the descendants of the men who helped Malatesta. Families who built their fortunes on the betrayal of my grandfather. They are my rivals today. This book gives me the power to dismantle them, to expose them, to finish what was started 60 years ago." "More violence," she whispered, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "More revenge." "It's my world," he said unapologetically. "The only way to survive in it is to ensure your enemies can't get back up." She looked at his face, at the man who was an architect of empires and of pain. She thought of her own life, her constant struggle, her loneliness. She had always been the caregiver, the protector, the one who fixed the mistakes of others. No one had ever protected her. No one had ever seen the strength behind her tired facade. Until him. Maybe the madness wasn't staying. Maybe the madness was walking away. Slowly, she walked toward him, stopping just a step away, in the sunlight pouring through the window. She could see the dust motes dancing in the beams between them. "If I stay," she said, her voice low but clear, "I will not be your prisoner." An eyebrow of his arched. I never intended for you to be one. And I will not be a silent bystander in your world, she continued, meeting his gaze. I can't become someone who ignores violence, who accepts cruelty as a cost of business. A flicker of something new appeared in his eyes. Curiosity, respect. What are you proposing, Elena? I'm proposing a partnership, she said, the audacity of her own words surprising her. You have the power. You have the strength. But you rule with fear and revenge. I understand compassion. I know how to care for people. Maybe there's a way to rule with strength, but also with honor. An honor that isn't just based on retribution. He watched her, the silence stretching. She thought he would laugh, that he would dismiss her as a naive fool. Instead, he said, You're asking me to change. No, she replied. I'm asking you to let me try to change you, and if I can't, then I'm free to walk away. A slow, genuine smile finally touched Marcello's lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, reaching his eyes. You, he said, his voice full of a reluctant admiration, are negotiating the terms of your surrender. I'm not surrendering, she shot back, her heart pounding. I'm choosing my battlefield. He closed the final distance between them. His hand came up to her face, this time with a certainty that hadn't been there before. His fingers tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. Then choose, he whispered, his mouth a breath from hers. And she chose. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of overwhelming passion, nor a kiss of surrender. It was a kiss of acceptance, a seal. He tasted of coffee and power, and the promise of a dangerous, uncertain future. She felt his arms wrap around her, pulling her close, his body hard and warm against hers. It was like being embraced by a storm. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his gray eyes now dark with emotion. You have no idea what you've just started, he murmured. No, she agreed, her hand coming up to touch his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath his shirt. But for the first time in a very long time, I'm not afraid to find out. She didn't know what the future held for them. There would be darkness, undoubtedly. There would be conflict. She would be at war not only with his world, but perhaps with him. But as she looked into the eyes of the architect of both her ruin and her salvation, she knew one thing for certain. The mistake that had led her to his door, the text sent in a moment of blind desperation, hadn't been a mistake after all. It had been fate, and her life, her real life, was just beginning.